Thank you so much. Your presentation has been excellent, very clear, and you've been a perfect example of all that you have said.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the feedback, and I'm glad it's been useful.
There is a question in the chat, Giulia.
Yes. Can you share some positive or negative experience of communicating on advocacy? Ooh, great question. Absolutely. So I think we've had a very positive experience of communicating for advocacy around the work that sisters are doing globally, the work that sisters have been doing during the pandemic and kind of since the start of the pandemic, and also the work that sisters do generally. I think one thing that we found as part of this project is that sisters are an absolute kind of gold mine of incredible stories, incredible witness to some really important, really crucial issues in terms of human development around the world. And it's been a great joy and a great privilege to start sharing some of those stories. So that's been a very positive experience. In terms of negative experiences, that's a very good question. I'm not sure that the project has been around long enough for us to have had any very negative experiences so far. So I think I'm going to keep that in mind, and if anything comes up, let you know. Certainly, I mean, perhaps I can talk about this on a more personal level. I've had some negative experiences of communicating, particularly kind of speaking in meetings, at kind of presentations, where I felt like I had not quite understood the point of the meeting. So I think a typical negative experience can be around kind of feeling like you didn't quite have all the cards in your hand. You didn't quite know what was kind of in the deck of cards, and suddenly you're dealt a card that you hadn't expected. Or you find that there are people in the meeting that you didn't realize would be there, or you understand that actually people have had a conversation previously that you weren't part of, and that's changed the agenda. I think feeling unprepared can be a very scary thing when we speak publicly, when we communicate on anything. And it's something that can really throw you off course. I've had negative experiences of feeling like I'd lost the plot, lost control of the situation because I hadn't been well prepared. Either, sometimes it was my fault, sometimes it wasn't, but feeling unprepared is something that can be scary. And I think you can only learn from experience on that. It happens to the best of us, it happens to all of us, and you just learn those things that you can practice with yourself to keep relaxed, to keep yourself at ease, and to kind of work through the difficulties. I'm going to look at a few other questions.
Yeah, there is one in Spanish. Right?
I see that, yes. So, yes, we were talking about kind of being friendly, being approachable to someone who is shy, who is perhaps more nervous, and being perhaps more reserved when you're faced with someone who is stronger, who has their own agenda. I'm hearing some background noise, by the way. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, I'm solving.
No problem. So yes, I can talk about that a bit more. I think the point that I was trying to get across was about how we can wear different masks. And the idea of a mask is a tricky one, because of course we've just been talking about authenticity. We do want to be our true selves. And the more we are our true selves, the more we can engage, the more we can connect with others. But I guess rather than a mask, the analogy I want is perhaps we can wear different hats, so we can kind of communicate in a certain role, in a certain manner, that puts us in a certain position relative to our audience, and we can choose that role, we can choose that manner, we can decide the hat that we wear. And I think it's very important to think about kind of, are we in a situation where we're the person who is going to struggle the most to relax? So are we focused on am I focused on doing the things that are going to make me feel good, that are going to make me feel calm? Am I focused on kind of making sure that I'm in control of the situation? Or is there someone else who is actually more nervous than me? Is there someone else who actually needs a bit of reassurance? Because sometimes we can go into a particular communication arena sort of armed for battle a little bit, you know, ready to defend our own idea, ready to communicate our own message. And what's required is more empathy. What's required is understanding that the other person too might come from a place of nervousness. So I hope that answers the question. The idea is to really balance what I need to feel comfortable in a situation where I'm communicating with what the other person might need, and to try and hold those things in balance, depending a little bit on the kind of dynamics of power as well in that situation.
Giulia, could you please, in case, read the question, because otherwise we don't know which question you answer to. I think there is one which is very interesting. In a situation or countries where people are afraid to speak up for fear of being labeled, how best can we practice advocacy?
Yes, in a situation or countries where people are afraid to speak up, how can we practice advocacy? That's a great question. And it speaks to what we were just saying about advocating where you are. You know, we're all in different situations. We all experience very different lived realities. So I think a key element here, and something that we really want to emphasize as part of this project, is that you might not be able to speak up. Sometimes doing advocacy requires work behind the scenes because the situation that you're in puts you in danger if you speak up, if you step out on the stage. And that's okay. That's kind of part of the bigger advocacy picture. The key thing that we've found in conversations with sisters is that the global kind of connectedness is key. So you might be unable to speak up, but someone can speak up at a more global level on the particular challenges that you face in your country, in your area. And because they're at a kind of different level, in a different place, they can speak up without fear of repercussion. That's kind of one aspect. So you don't always have to speak up. There are different ways, kind of quieter ways, ways that are more subtle sometimes, that you can start creating change without being seen, without exposing yourself to danger. But the other side of that is that you can start small. You can start fomenting a culture of advocacy. Perhaps you can find those 2 or 3 like-minded people who would be on board if they understood what you're doing. You don't have to put yourself out immediately into the public arena where you know you will be labeled. Sometimes you can start with a small group, with just one ally, one person who, you know, gets the change that you're working towards and wants to help. And sometimes it doesn't require, you know, a big statement. Public speaking doesn't necessarily require kind of switching on your megaphone and reaching as many people as possible right away. Sometimes it can be about slowly but surely, you know, shifting the culture, one connection, one person at a time. And that's where that human connection is really, really important. Maybe you don't have a stage right now, it's too dangerous, or you would be labeled, ostracized, but you can whisper in the ear of the one person sitting next to you who is most likely to agree. So it's kind of about finding different ways to do it that don't put you at risk. Patrizia, are there any other questions that you?
Yes, there are.
I can see them. Yeah.
But, you know, there is another one. In the beginning, you spoke about a sense of human dignity. Why a sense?
So I think the way that that's phrased in the advocacy vision statement is just intended to convey that we want everyone to experience a sense of human dignity, whether that's their own human dignity, but also the human dignity of others. So I think what we're trying to say is, we could have said we want everyone to experience human dignity. But what we also want is for everyone to experience the sense of the human dignity of others. And that's why we chose the word sense, because it is relational. It is about people in themselves, but also with each other.
I now ask you two other questions. One is in Spanish and one in Italian. So we also respect the different languages participation. And the first one is, muchas gracias, excelente la presentación.
Thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation, and I want to know if there are limits regarding advocacy. And the second question is in Italian, and a sister who's a
Compared to
journalist
the
asks,
times of the various media,
regarding the different
are
types
there
of
cautions
media,
to have, or
what is the principle that we should
less is more is always
apply?
valid?
Should we
What do you
always apply
think?
the principle less is more? Is that always valid, or is it not, depending on the situation? Are there limits for the advocacy work? Well, that's a great question. I think that we have never asked ourselves this question. There can be limits. That would be my answer. Surely what happens when we do advocacy work is that sometimes we need practice, we need time that we could perhaps use to do some practical things in a given situation, or it requires time that we could be using to give an immediate response in an emergency situation. But advocacy has an element, something that has to do with a systemic approach. And when we look at things from the point of view of these systemic organizations, sometimes we lose sight of some very concrete and real details. So my answer would be that sometimes we can't look at things in the long term. We have to give immediate answers to very concrete questions. Now, is it always true that less
this is a
is
good
more?
question.
Regarding the
As for the times of the various media, it is true that there are some spaces
it is
in which
definitely true
it is important
that
indeed to
sometimes it is
go in a
important
deeper
to
analysis
look at
of
certain
some
issues in
topics
depth.
because
And
it is crucial
extremely
to take
important to
advantage
make
of
the
the
most of
spaces,
some
of
spaces and
these larger spaces
situations
when
we
they
can
exist,
look at things
because
in
the
depth.
media landscape and information
Because in
landscape
general,
is a one
in the
in
media, we
which
don't
these
have a lot of
spaces
space
are
to
really
look at
few.
things
So
in
when
depth.
they
So
exist,
when
it
we
would be
have
important.
Non so, qualcuno scriveva nella chat, possiamo verificare, forse Giulia, so se vuoi tornare all'inglese siamo più tranquille, forse. So, attenzione alle interpreti, gentilmente, se cambiano lingua devono cambiare anche la sala. Grazie. Vai Giulia in inglese.
Sorry about that. Sorry about the confusion. So I think that, yes, where we do kind of find, especially in the media space, that we have time, that we have the opportunity to go more in depth, then I think it is important to take that opportunity. I think less is more as a tip, as a kind of buzzword, refers more to the way that we communicate than to what we communicate. So less is more in the sense that simplicity is vital. Less is more in the sense that it's better to communicate one concept clearly than three concepts in a way that's confusing. Less is more in the how, in the way that we do things. But certainly at a time when, you know, information is rapid fire and spaces to communicate, particularly within the media, tend to be focused on sound bites only. If we do find a space to communicate more in depth, then of course that's crucial too.
Thank you, Giulia. I'm not reading the questions that are more focused on advocacy because today is more on communication for advocacy. So I'm selecting the questions more on communication because you will tell us that we will have another webinar on on advocacy and other initiative that Uta and you are planning on advocacy and to inform the sisters. I want to ask you one question, which is very interesting. It's in Italian.
Yes.
Come gestire
how to manage advocacy in the face of cultures whose rhythm is different in communication processes.
I'm going to stick with the English just for the sake of for the sake of sanity and for the translators. That is a really interesting question, because advocacy is about change, as we were saying. And so it is inevitably a process that is kind of located in time. In some contexts, that change can happen more quickly, and in some contexts, that change will happen incredibly slowly. And depending on the context that we come from, we can be more or less comfortable in one place or in another. Now, I think that's particularly true and particularly relevant to communication around advocacy. There are situations in which you can communicate something and expect it to be picked up straight away. Contexts, cultural contexts, in which you know that you might communicate your systemic vision, your policy suggestion, whatever it is, and know that there is kind of that there is groundwork that has been done, that the ground has been prepared for that communication to progress rapidly. And other situations where you can start talking about this and have to engage for weeks or months or years before any actual change can happen. So I think the only way to deal with that is with extreme radical empathy. The only way to deal with that is by kind of locating yourself firmly at the empathy end of the spectrum and thinking, okay, no matter what my message is, this change is not going to happen without engagement. So if the engagement is the key, then I have to start from where my audience is at.
Giulia, io selezionerei, se tu sei d'accordo, I'm speaking Italian, two other questions. One from the French and one in English. And then perhaps we can have a very short break, and then we will try to start the working groups. So you can give us some of the directions before we go. We take a break also for our interpreters, and then we can take a time for the working groups and then come back here, and perhaps we can recuperate also some questions from the chat. Is that okay with you?
Yes, I was just going to say, if you like, we can after this just kind of quickly share the instructions for the groups and then do that, because that will also be a break for the interpreter. So then
it's perfect. So the question in French, I will read it in Italian to facilitate the interpreters. Per l'advocacy, vorrei sapere.
For advocacy, I would like to know if sensitization is a preparation phase for advocacy.
Such a good question. So I would say that awareness raising, sensibilizzazione, comes under the umbrella of the mobilization and empowerment pillar. I would say that idea of mobilization and empowerment as one of the key activities of advocacy also includes raising awareness. It is, of course, something that you can do as part of other advocacy activities. Certainly your communication might be aimed at raising awareness, or your research might be aimed at raising awareness. But I think that as a general kind of thematic area, awareness raising is part of that sense that advocacy is also about mobilizing, because mobilizing really means to get people moving, right? That's what mobilizing means. And to get people moving, they have to know the thing that you are trying to communicate. They have to know why they should move. So I think, yes, awareness raising is very much a kind of preparatory activity in the area of mobilization and then empowerment, all those things around engagement and kind of community building as well.
Thank you, Giulia. Before the English question, just a clarification for James, that actually in Spanish we use incidencia, We do not use advocacy. So if the interpreter are using this word, they can change it with incidencia. Thank you, James. And the last question comes from Akweka Communication Office in Africa. How can sisters get the media to be on their side and vice versa in relation to their advocacy work?
Well, the good news is our experience of the project so far is that it's not too difficult to get the media on side. And the reason for that is, I would say globally, the media doesn't know very much about what sisters do. That may be more or less true depending on the type of media, depending on the context, but certainly there's a whole world out there, a whole mediatic, journalistic world that really doesn't understand what sisters do in their day-to-day lives and what they might be advocating for. And I think the impression that we've had from the kind of, as I say, the first year of this project is that when people discover what sisters are doing, they're amazed, they're excited, they're astounded by all this incredible work that's happening, and by kind of all the knowledge that sisters have, the witness that they bear, the experience that they can share. So I think, as we were saying before, in any communication, the magic happens in the space where two agendas intersect. You have an agenda, you have things that you want to share, you have change that you want to create. And the media, the specific journalists, the media outlet, whoever it is, they have their own agenda too. They want to sell a good story. They want to, share something exciting. They want a good, a catchy title for their article, whatever it is they want. And I think there's a lot of leeway in that space. There's a lot of room for maneuver where those two agendas can intersect, because what sisters do is incredibly exciting to the world that knows nothing about it. So I think it's just about kind of, trying out different things and seeing what sticks, what gets more of a reaction. And again, those things that we've talked about, it's about authenticity. Journalists want to hear, a real story, a real lived experience. It's about creating that connection and trying out different ways of doing that.
Wow, we can continue actually, because there are other questions. So it's important. So there is really a need to go more in depth with this theme. So the plan